Hello, and welcome to the Book Club Review, the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking. Listeners, you know the thrill when you walk into a bookshop and see all those beautiful new titles with crisp covers and unbroken spines. But there's more than one way to shop for books, and true book lovers will also know the delights of the Secondhand Bookshop. Here it's about the joy of rummaging through, of not being able to find things, and instead allowing the books to find you. Or so says Tyona Campbell, proprietor of Barnabees, a treasure trove of second-hand books tucked away in a small Suffolk village. A Barnaby, or Bishy Barney Bee, is an old Suffolk word for a ladybird. They cover the windows of Tyona's building in late spring, and so she found the perfect name for her shop, which is also the house she grew up in.
It was two separate cottages up until the 1970s. Beautiful beamed, I suppose originally would have been thatched, but 16th century? The church here in the village is St Peter's, which is thatched, and that probably dates back 13th century. But it is an old building. It's a beautiful space, and one that I'm very privileged to be allowed to work in and to have created the shop in. I hope it has a homely feel. It is a layout which should offer people a bit of comfort and a bit of solace from a rather hectic and mad world out there, the high-octane living of Southwold and Aldborough. To come off the beaten track a little bit to these smaller villages, offers weird and wonderful moments, I hope.
Let's try and describe it and let people know what it's like. There are these beams, and everywhere I look, there are different kinds of shelves. It's quite an eclectic shelving collection that you've got here. And then the shelves are just stuffed to the brim with beautiful second-hand books.
Yeah, it's a little bit higgledy-piggledy. There are methods behind it, but I haven't quite figured those out yet. The idea was to really get the shop up and running as quickly as possible and not to worry about uniformity, to mask my inability to create sense and logic. But I think that's what's unique and special about second-hand bookshops. Growing up in Suffolk, as I have over the last 35 years, I'm really used to those bizarre, off-kilter junk shops and antique shops that didn't quite sit comfortably in any direction. And so this is a little homage to that time. A little protest to the non-digital age, I think.
I want to ask you more about what led you to want to start the shop, but first of all, I feel that we must just try and describe this tiny village a little bit better to people, and I have the perfect thing to help me do it. On my last trip to your shop, I bought a copy of The Companion Guide to East Anglia by John Seymour, mainly because it was a beautiful edition with a lovely windmill on the front, and I thought, that would look nice on my shelf. Little did I know when I got it home that it was going to turn out to be such a gem. It's so good. And let me just read what he writes about Westleton. Westleton is a big and fine village. For all we said that it's tiny, it's a big and fine village. It stands about a fine green with a horse pond and all. The once famous windmill has, alas, lost its sail. The large pub opposite the church serves good meals all summer. But one of Westleton's uniquenesses, besides the very lively fair held every summer when barrels are rolled down the main street to the consternation of the police, is the fact that it contains the world's leading clematis specialist, a Mr. James Fisk. A local boy, he started work in big nurseries and other places, fell in love with clematis, started growing them on his own at home, and now grows 150 different varieties and sends them to all parts of the world, making his remote and otherwise little-known village, to clematis lovers at least, world famous. Another, older source of fame is the Witch's Stone near the priest's door of the huge thatched barn-like church, over which no grass will ever grow. And if you put your handkerchief in the grating of the wall and run eastwards, northwards and back again by the west end of the church, you will be vouchsafed the sound of the devil clanking his chains below the grating. The present writer has not tried it.
It couldn't be said better than that, thank you. It is quite a weird and wonderful little village. The Witch's Stone, yes, every other night my cat and I like to go and frequent the churchyard, which is across the way. And Kate, yes, we have conjured up a few spirits and ideas there. My dear mums had Barnabees exorcised. This was about 15 years ago. A lady had a vision that there was a Cromwellian soldier who was trapped in the building and his spirit needed to be released. So my mother went to the local Harmony Centre and a group of trained spiritualists came along and they cleansed the building and allowed him to be set free. I love the building very much, and it is just to be a very small custodian of it. I feel very lucky. The only way I can run this premises is due to my family leasing it to me at a comfortable rate, but it is an immense joy.
You're not actually the only bookshop in Westleton, are you?
Indeed, Kate, no. There is a very much world-famous secondhand bookshop that has been here for many years. In fact, I think in excess of 45 years. That's Mr. Jackson, who is my former boss, a very dear friend, and I owe him an enormous amount. He has allowed me to open up on his turf. I went and asked him 3 years ago, and he very much said no. And so we never speak now. No, I'm being very silly, but he is a very gracious soul and an exceptional book dealer, and specialises, I would say, in the antiquarian and collectible books. I describe my stock as much more sunny. It's not as scarce or rare titles in Barnabees, but for general stock, just to hope that these books reach and find new owners and then go on their journeys again. It's trying to make them have their second life, maybe third, fourth. Books only flourish and enjoy from being held and read. In fact, actually, speaking to a local bookbinder, lovely Helen Durrant, a book really, particularly leather-bound books, really benefit from being held and coddled, canoodled. Well, I don't know, that's quite intimate, I don't know about that. But they need and flourish from human touch, and the oils from our hands keep the leather supple. And so it's really making sure that they want to be found again.
How did you get started? This room that we're sitting in is full of books. The room next door is also full of books. How does one begin setting up a second-hand bookshop?
I have worked for Mr. Jackson in Chapel Books, but I've also, for the last 5.5 years, I've worked for any amount of books on the Charing Cross Road for a gentleman called Nigel Burwood, who, again, I owe a great deal to. A wonderful and very patient guru, I should say. And I suppose I started to feel a need and a want to carve out an identity through buying and creating my own library with the idea of selling, but it never felt possible. And I think it is that eerie feeling of wanting to do something and not knowing where and how to begin. So yes, to answer your question, it started with one book. And I suppose from that book you buy another book and another. A good way of starting is perhaps specialising. I personally don't at the moment. I'm trying to carve out more of an identity through local interests. Books on, ultimately my dream bookshop would just be literary theory and books on cats. But it wouldn't pay the bills, Kate. And I suppose the secret is to go to auction, where people perhaps are downsizing, wanting to sell off collections which they have no use for, and you will start to perhaps see patterns in those books. And hopefully if they fit your interests, that you could start to grow from there. I only really thought about selling online, and as I say, I'm very lucky to have a very supportive family who I have elbowed my other brothers out of here. My whole family are voracious readers and people who love books and like to see things renewed, restored, reread. That's the hope, is to get books felt and enjoyed again. Books are always in transit, I think, much like the words inside them. Where there's one book, there's usually several.
Yes, and so it grows, I can see that. How do you keep them all organised? What's your sort of system when you come in?
That's the $34,000 question, Kate. There are lots of ways of organising books. I suppose actually pointing out the orange penguins, it's important to put like with like. But at this moment, I do try and keep it quite fresh, quite lithe, and I do like the random quality, which only a second-hand bookshop can offer. Some people think it's a ruse that I'm trying to make them delve and dig deeper into the shop to find what they want, but it really isn't. It's because I'm incredibly lazy, Kate. This autumn and winter, I think I'm really going to make sense of it. Famous last words. But I think some things are very easy to categorise, from politics to gardening to naval history. You suddenly have a few titles that don't fit comfortably under a particular umbrella. And I love that about second-hand books. They can drift, shift, meld. These first 2.5 years have been absolutely fascinating. Some really unusual and difficult occurrences each week that shape and that make me feel very privileged to be allowed to do something that I love so much.
In the 2.5 years that you've been doing this, and obviously a lot of books have passed through your hands, are there any that kind of particularly stick out in your mind as being ones that you were really excited to find, or ones where you did really well when you sold them?
I suppose, again, it's looking for things that are a bit... I do believe all books are born equal. Sadly, some more equal than others. And it is trying to find things that are a bit more specialist. From modern firsts to signed editions to just those, unusual and quite startling titles. Half the fun is the hunt and the pursuit to try and find and buy books that are suited to the shop. I suppose since opening, there's lots of areas which I would have never been particularly interested in myself, from transport to military history. I try and buy very much out of my comfort boundaries. I studied creative writing at university, or I did a master's in creative writing. So my backstory as to why and how I came about doing this was through the love of writing. And in particular, my main love is science fiction. A novel that I wanted to write was about the death of the internet. And I suppose, again, the reason for the shop to be open and creative was a little protest to the ease and joy of the modern age. So this is a way of books getting lost and hopefully found again in a roundabout way. There are these wonderful moments, and they are quite far and few between, where you suddenly are holding something that you know the author has held, it's signed, and it is with deep reverence and enormous glee that just for those fleeting seconds you are part of something that, really stirs and moves. I feel hugely fortunate to do something that connects me to people's loves, obsessions, wants. From holding a signed edition of Angela Carter to a rather scrappy and frightening-looking paperback of William S. Burroughs, you just feel great excitement. But we're only custodians for a little while. Everything must transfer, and it is a very transient business, I think. It would be lovely to keep them all, but it's impractical.
Where do you see things going in the future? I mean, I have to say, from everything I'm aware of, particularly reading the Diary of a Bookseller, Sean Bythell books, which much is about just the struggle of keeping this business going and going out and finding the books and then bringing them back and then having customers who come in and try to haggle with him, even with the low prices that he has marked because they want to pay. Where do you see it going? What do you think the future is? Obviously, you're passionate about it, and I can see there's a value in it for you that makes it worthwhile, but is it necessarily a financial one? Do you think you can make it work?
You've just mentioned the set text, the number one set text of the secondhand book selling world. Sean is phenomenal, and it's always really exciting to see what the captain is up to. It is very easy to feel downbeat. Have I been wittering on here, stating all the joys and the enormous pleasure in it, but to be practical, the books do need to be sold. And the longevity of second-hand books, I donate a lot of books myself to charity, and in fact, I think we all feel very comfortable in donating books that way, and it's an essential part of books being loved and reread again. I think there always will be a place for second-hand books, and for these obscure and unusual spaces. What has been a huge part of the second-hand book trade is the internet, and the best dealers utilise that to their fullest. To have a premises, you have to get the balance right. And thinking of lovely Sean there, to sort of make sure that a presence is online, and it's a big part of what I have to do each day, is listing and cataloguing books. And it is a bit mercenary, but the job is to get these puppies out of the pound and into people's lives and enjoyed again. I suppose it is a bit ropey, actually, to be perfectly honest with you. Would I do it again? No, you'd need to be mad, I think. No, but I absolutely love it. But the most important thing, I guess, with all businesses, to use the internet as much as possible.
What is it you love about it so much?
I suppose, to me, it is a school, and I am the very unruly caretaker. And I'm blessed with these sometimes difficult, sometimes very uplifting, very knowledgeable patrons or children who come here and are sparked and enthused again. And I think, unlike a new bookshop, which we're very lucky down the road in Aldborough, they have the Aldborough Bookshop, which is an absolute marvel. But there will always be a place for second-hand books. I love it because people find things, it's not that they didn't want or know they needed, but that they suddenly are taken on a tributary that they have opened up to them by mistake or by a mysterious misadventure. There is something unruly and slightly dangerous about second-hand books. I love the idea that you are not being watched, as you do online, and the services online are monitoring and finding our likes and wants. But here, it's all a bit ensconced and mysterious.
And if any of our book club listeners were to come here for a rummage, do you have a book that you maybe would push towards them that you think might make for a good book club book?
I suppose one of the most important things about a second-hand bookshop is that you have got the out of print and those authors and titles that are actually quite difficult to find elsewhere. But an author that I'm very fond of, It's a man called Jeff Noon, who used to live and work in Manchester, but now is in Brighton. Sci-fi author, who's someone at university that I came across. And I went and interviewed him in Brighton when I was doing my degree, and he was very generous, and his writing had a really profound way of sculpting my own, and I think he's worth a read, I really do. I'm not working on commission.
What books would you recommend?
The one that he won the Arthur C. Clarke Award for was Vert, and one of my absolute favourites also is Pollen. I do really like Needle in the Groove. They sit under the umbrella of science fiction, but also the further canopy of cyberpunk. They are quite psychedelic and they are quite gritty, and I'm afraid my area of interest is being really transported and teleported, in fact, through different realities and narratives and good writing. I must just add, it's a really beautiful warm day. We're coming up to perhaps the end of the summer, and I speak for all secondhand book dealers everywhere that we pray for bad weather, because it makes people come away from the beaches and come back into the shops again. But to a beautiful summer it's been, and I can't tell you how lovely it is to meet you. Thank you, Kate.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having us. And I hope at least some of our listeners, if they find themselves in Suffolk, will make the detour to come to Westleton and to this complete delight of a shop. Thanks so much.
Thanks for dropping by.
That's all for this episode. Tyona recommended Vert and Pollen by Jeff Noon. And if, like Ty, you enjoy sci-fi, you might want to check out our book club episode number 13, where we had great fun reading and discussing sci-fi classic We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. We also briefly touched on The Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bythel, who has a follow-up, Confessions of a Bookseller, just out. And both are highly recommended for anyone wanting to know more on the ins and outs of running a secondhand bookshop. You can follow Barnabees on Instagram at Barnabees Books, and if you're in or near Westleton in Suffolk, the shop is located on the Yoxford Road and is open from Thursday to Sunday between 11 and 5. On our next book club show, we'll be discussing Palace Walk by Naguib Mahfouz, the most highly acclaimed Egyptian writer of the 20th century and a key figure in the literature of the Arab world. But what did Laura's book club make of it? Listen in to find out. If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, or email thebookclubreview@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.